Subscribe, motherfucker. What's good, everybody? My name is Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. If you're brand new, we do lots of sound design and production tutorials here, and if you like this stuff, then maybe consider following the intro and subscribing. Also turn on your bell notifications. So something new that I'm interested in talking about is that we actually have some comments to kind of like react to or whatever. I post polls and stuff from time to time asking questions, and I love when you guys respond to me and tell me your thoughts and things, because that helps me decide of like, it gives me ideas for the channel, right? I asked recently, what genres are you most interested in learning about outside of drum and bass / neuro music? And Wool is the top comment, says Hyperglitch. Big shout out to Wool, go subscribe to his channel, listen to his music, it's freaking amazing. Kim Yona says speedcore. It's one of my favorite genres. I'd like to see your take on it since there aren't really any real speedcore tutorials out there. I had to listen to what that was, and even though it's not for me, it could be a crazy project. Honestly, been really into funk lately. Okay, been trying to get better at epic orchestral stuff. Now, I'd actually be interested in doing this. I just need to maybe have some kind of idea for a scene or something. You should bring back the thing where you scored a scene like Metal Gear, like the one that you did. So he's actually talking about, I used to do sound design videos, or sound design to videos, and I need a program, or I need some kind of plugin or something that allows like video within the DAW. So maybe I'll download Ableton again for that. That could be a cool video. But let me know what you guys think. Like, go ahead and submit the comments to me if you want, and let me know what you're most interested in, and that could be really cool. However, welcome. Today we're actually going to be talking about something completely different than those. We are going to be taking a look at something called future garage, or just like, I guess, ambient, deep garage music in general. If you like Ghost Tech, if you like Burial, if you like Vacant, Smokefish, Sublab, Azalea, this might be for you. Now, this isn't how to do them, this is how to do me in that world. But let's go ahead and take a listen to what we got. So yeah, it's pretty nice, easy vibe, nothing too crazy. If anything, it's a little bit more restricted, just in the sense of kind of like being more laid back, but at the same time easy to listen to. Some key characteristics of this kind of music are having somewhere like anywhere between 127 and 140 BPM usually. And this kind of takes a lot of inspiration from like typical garage, which incorporates a lot of like swingy triplet beats. So the other key components of this is that you want it to sound somewhat ghostly, and so obviously, as you can probably predict or foreshadow, we're going to be doing something along the lines of having a lot of reverb and figuring out ways to make our bass really wide. Probably the main thing that we'll be talking about though, which is probably the hardest to do and something I've been tweaking with this project over and over again, is just kind of like this percussion. So we'll be talking about some cool things with that. But let's go ahead and dive into the actual meat of the project, and we will start with the drums. So the drums are as is. And that's pretty much just our kick and snare pattern that we have. It's nothing too crazy. Now, if you've seen my drum tutorials from before, you'll know how this stuff is made, but basically I like to usually use something along the lines of kick 2 and kind of just shape my kick in this way. And one thing that I almost always do whenever I'm making kicks within this is I turn off the top end, because I end up cutting it off anyways. I'm kind of a big fan of like having more of a kick that you feel as opposed to a kick that you hear. And that's just kind of like my style in general. But the only thing that I really did to this, just in particular, because like you don't really want like the heaviest drums with this kind of music, is taking a saturator and then just kind of shaping it a little bit with an EQ, kind of like this. And I'd even argue that like a lot of other songs that are like this actually probably take off like 100 hertz or so from this area, but for me, like, it's fine. It's my music, so I'm keeping some of the sub end in there. Now the snare, or the stick hit rather, has quite a bit of processing in it, and you'll see that there's two different ones right here, just this kind of like ta-ta, and that's just a different pitch but the same stick. But pretty much we have some saturation going on that just makes it a little bit thicker. Now the frequency shifter is something that I enjoy using. I usually use the kilohearts one, but what it allows me to do is actually shape the tone of the fundamental. So you can see that the fundamental is at A, probably sharp 4. Yeah, it's in A because this tune is in D. But if you listen to it without the frequency shifter, it makes it just a little bit darker in that way, and that's a really clean way to kind of tune your drums without it like totally transposing the sample aspect of it. So with this EQ, I've done this twice, and that's just again to kind of shape the fundamental in that way, to really try to pull up what, I guess, tone that little stick is. I'm pulling away some of the transient and boosting some of the sustain on that. And then I'm doing some glue compression here. This is pretty much turn the soft clip on, which is the peak clip, and then make it a little bit louder. And then something that I do on all of my drums multiple times is just clip the heck out of them because I'm a big fan of that. Finally, we kind of bring some of that volume back with our limiter. Actually, I didn't think this one needed it. I always just do it out of habit though, so that's kind of that. Now I will say though that I did a little bit more processing to this once we got to this stage right here. And I did some more frequency shifting, a little bit more EQ shaping because I wanted it to be a little bit darker. So, and then added just a little bit of reverb to it. And I'm not really worried about like doing like this, the grouping and then splitting and stuff. I don't really care. A lot of times within like this kind of music, you kind of want things to not sound as good of quality. So like don't be so precious with your mixing and all that, I guess. And you can always EQ stuff out and make it seem darker than it needs to be. So the next thing that we're going to talk about are the hats. There's not really a whole lot going on here, but it's pretty much just this hat sample that I've taken. And what I've done is grabbed a pitch shifter, EQ'd pretty much the low end out of that, and added just a little bit of reverb in that way. So that way it has a little bit of tail end and it kind of leads into the next hit. The next thing that we've got is a third stick hit, and that sounds like this. And this is just purely for reverb. So again, same thing with the frequency shifting. I'm starting to sound like a broken record. Pitch shifter, reverb, and some EQ to kind of shape it in that way. And together, this all kind of has like a nice cohesive kind of feeling to it. I really like that rhythm. That's just one of my favorite things to kind of like use as a driver. So the next thing that we've got here is just this little Foley hit, and it sounds like this. And that's just got some EQ on it with a little bit of delay, kind of like so. And then we're going to get into the percussive elements of this. And really, like, I want to talk about this stuff as a whole because I don't really feel the need to talk about like each and every individual hit. But let's go ahead and take a listen to what that sounds like. Okay, well, this is kind of like the main like shuffle, I guess like boogie part of the tune, for lack of better description. But really what you want to think about with this is just creating some kind of swingy rhythm. These are all in triplets, as you can see over here, and I've grabbed just a bunch of different Foley samples from this and kind of pulled it into that. And the longest thing that, or like what's taken me the longest for this tune is actually just kind of fleshing out a rhythm for that, of trying to make that work. But also like something that's really helpful is giving it space. So instead of just like a constant barrage of the rhythm, you can hear that at the last bar, or last, I guess, 2 beats of the bar, that you can hear that it has like a little bit of space followed by picking itself back up. And that's what really kind of settles that in for being or sounding groovy. Again, like if you just kind of barrage it with like constant rhythm, then sometimes it can lose its appeal. But the processing aspect of this is probably the most complicated thing that we have in this whole thing, but it is a frequency shifter to make everything sound a lot darker. Then we've got a pitch shifter, but we're making sure that the mix isn't at 100%, and that is automatically going to make it like kind of seem like it's splitting. Then I've got a little bit of bit crushing just to give it a little fuzz. This Pro Q right here is just kind of dipping this area right here, and that's just what it looks like. So that way it sounds a little bit darker. And then the chorus aspect is actually what's giving it that actual like flange sound. If you put a chorus at 100% mix, take the stereo all the way to 0, then it will pretty much flange like that. And that's pretty much what I'm doing for that particular aspect of that. So next up, we've got our sub, which I love these kinds of things. Okay, yeah, I guess I'm covering the EQ first. This is just a detuned saw wave that is kind of the same thing that we did on the last video where I'm creating a wall of sound. And I'm doing the same trick where I'm focusing on creating a space with a notch filter followed by a low pass filter. I'm bringing some of that stuff back with some distortion, double the distortion. And then on this, I'm actually splitting the low and high frequencies. On the low end, I'm making sure that it's in mono, and then everything else above that has just a little bit of chorus and reverb followed by some distortion to pull it back. Because if we were to just listen to this on its own, you can't really hear it that well. So by turning the distortion on, it gives you just a little bit more. And the important thing to keep in mind with all this stuff is the fact that, like, you're not using a whole lot of instruments and they're pretty sustained, at least this bass is. And so, like, as opposed to trying to do so much like crazy jigsawing and all that, I'm trying to think about how do I use less instruments and make it sound bigger. And so that's why I feel okay with getting away with reverb on your bass in that sense. And plus, when you stack reverb elements in some case, it can start to sound like a wash, which if done right, I'm not saying that it's done right in this, but the theory is that if it's done right, you get these kind of like overtones and these things that kind of feel like it's like waving in, so to speak. Now on this is more so just for like fletchering this bass whenever it plays at the high end. If you listen to that first note right here, that gets pretty like resonant in that sense. And the goal with this is to try to keep it at a consistent volume regardless of what's, sorry, not consistent volume, but perceived consistent volume. You can look more up into that stuff for Fletcher Munsoning on Google or something, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the bass. Pretty simple. Let's see what this is. This is a nice little... This is just a triangle wave layered with a choir, and then we've got a little bit of AM going on right here. And I think the idea behind this was to just create like a nice easy pad behind that. But if we take off the filter, it should sound like this. So yeah, nothing too complicated, some detuned voices, long attack, long release. Put a filter on it. This is probably just trying to fortify, maybe controlling the mids a bit, I imagine. Yeah, we're controlling the mids to some extent. Then we are making sure that we're definitely cutting off the top end of that and then sending it through some reverb and then some ensemble with a little bit of limiting. That's pretty much it for that. The next thing that we've got is this little bell thing. I don't think that I'm going to keep this within this tune, assuming that I ever finish this tune anyways, but I do like the bell, but I'll probably end up changing it into something else. But this looks like it's the exact same thing, just a pluck version of that at a lower octave. So take the same preset and then instead of making it a pad, have a fast attack and long release, and that will kind of make it a little bell thing. This is a choir, I believe. Yeah, so just take the classic choir. It's actually a stock sound within Faceplant. Add some distortion, some chorus, some flanging, a little bit of EQ to take out the low ends, and then finish it up with some reverb. And again, like reverb, 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 that's pretty much like just drench it in reverb. This is actually my favorite sound of the tune. I really like that. It came directly from that one tune, what's it called? I think Southern Comfort. And I was really like, I love that Reese that he has, that Burial has in that tune. And while it's not exact, it was kind of what this was trying to copy in some cases. But basically what you do is you take a saw wave and you set it to synthetic, have a bunch of voices on this, and then you have a fundamental saw wave that's acting kind of like as a fortification. But what I'm doing is giving this just a little bit of FM, and then I'm notching this as over time as it plays, I think with the LFO. So if you listen, yeah, you can kind of hear it go in that way. And then we've got a little bit of chorus, some distortion, more distortion, because why not? And because this is kind of a lead, then we can kind of get away with some reverb in that aspect. But I really like that as the turnaround for kind of like making it seem like it's a little bit harder in that sense, especially like when it goes back into itself. And the idea about why this works, there's multiple things playing at the same time. Sorry, let me turn that off. And the reason why this works for me is because this is a higher octave, but it still comes from the same kind of like wave family. I just made that up, but wave family of the reeds, because it's also a saw wave. And so I feel like they complement each other pretty well. So this thing is something that I do in a lot of my videos, something that I do in all of my tunes. It's a motion. Sorry, that sounds really nice. So what I did was I took this same bell over here and I jammed out some random notes and didn't put them in time, didn't do any of that stuff. But if you take a listen over here, it's just a bunch of abstract notes that are kind of in. And what I've done is up here, I've actually bounced out some super drenched in reverb things that what you do is you take a reverb and then you bounce it like at 100% max width, whatever. Then you reverse it and then you drench it and reverb it again, and then you reverse it and you end up getting something kind of like this. So after you do that and print that a couple times, then what you do is you take that and throw it into a granular synth, and then you supplement it with a little bit of Foley. And so with these randomizers here on having it set to texture mode and then messing with the grain size, you can end up getting some really nice pads just by playing one note. So if we take a listen to this. Man, I love that. So part of the reason why I love Bitwig so much is because you can stack a bunch of samples within the same granular synth, I believe up to 128. So like as far as making these kinds of things, like, man, there's so much potential for that. And hopefully that's something that you guys use if you don't get anything else out of this tune. But it's one of my favorite things to do. It's part of my like signature, I guess, like go-tos for sound design. But once you kind of have that, you just take a little piece of it and throw it in here. And it kind of has like a nice complementing motion to the rest of the tune. Yeah, so the last thing that we're going to cover is actually just a preset, but it sounds like this. And this is just a preset that's Serenity Bell Pad from Houston Singletary. And the only thing that I did to change this was just process it after, which is just a little bit of EQ and then drenching it in reverb. But with all of those elements combined, you know, there's not that many tracks to this tune, but it kind of gives you that sense of like having like a nice ghostly feel. So like the overall abstract about like how to cultivate this, to me, would again be starting with the drums and kind of finding like a garage type feel, because once you have the drums, then you can decide like what kind of aesthetic or what kind of thing you want to put over it. But lots of heavy use of reverb and making sure that you have spaces within the rhythm is going to give you a lot of leeway in order to fill that with reverb, right? Or fill it with something else. Whereas if you wanted this to be more upfront, then everything would be a little bit more dry and you would try to fill the rhythmic spaces to try to create like a harder push and pull in that sense. But for me, I think that just having everything kind of be mellowed out, I definitely think that some ghostly vocals over this could be really nice, although I don't have access to any. But through all those kind of powers combined, you get something kind of like this. So for more existential music like this, be sure to like and subscribe and follow, and let me know in the comments if you have any other kind of tips that you want to add to this kind of stuff. And I would really appreciate if you help me get to that 10,000 subscriber goal. It would help me out a ton. If not, whatever, no worries. But that's pretty much all I have for you guys on this one, and I'll see you in the next one.